Today we'll be hearing excerpts from Dr. Willis's new collection, To Build a Trail, essays on curiosity, love, and wonder. Just a side note, his books will be available outside on a table for purchase after the reading. He is joined by students Emily Mata and Gabe Grabowski, who will be sharing selections of their own creative nonfiction. I was delighted when Dr. Willis asked me to host today's event, as all three of these people have positively impacted my life since coming to Westmont. I'm eager to hear them read and hope you are as well. Starting us off is Gabe Grabowski. Gabe is inspired and entertained by P. Willis's writing about his mountaineering adventures, as he would consider himself a mountaineer as well. He would like to thank Dr. Willis for admitting him to his workshop in creative nonfiction, even though he failed to meet the course prerequisites, solely based on the strength of his well-written email. He says, "Thanks for taking a chance on me." All right, this is Gabe, everyone.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here, Dr. Willis. I wrote this essay in April of last year in his workshop class. And for me, April is a month of birthdays, of mine, of people in my family, and of many friends. So, the essay is called Roots and Wings. Something seemed truly violating about the sound of my alarm that morning. It was a Saturday, and alarms weren't meant for Saturdays. But that was not my grievance. It was set at something like a reasonable 9 in the morning. I really hated that alarm clock, but it was all I had, as I had taken a college vagabond stand against the technological grasp of the smartphone. Thinking about the wretched noise the alarm clock emitted makes me angry even now, but that wasn't it either. I was used to it. That day, the noise was especially jarring, displacing, intrusive. It was April 22nd. I woke to the sound of the rhythmic screeching of my dorm room alarm, not to the kitchen rummagings of scrambled eggs in prep and Pop-Tarts jumping from the toaster furnace in golden brown form. I hit the snooze button on the alarm and woke up a second time to its screeching, instead of waking a second time, or at least pretending to the dysfunctional birthday chorus of my family and to catawampus candles in the warm, glistening Pop-Tarts. Happy birthday for most of my life has taken the form of breakfast in bed, an entourage of compliments, colorful, albeit clearly produced at the last minute cards of encouragement, and an abundance of extended family time. But that day I felt empty. 18 years of birthday ritual cadence was interrupted by the dorm room alarm, and no one seemed to speak the same celebratory language of my youth. I had been reflecting on what it actually means that we say happy birthday. We usually say it really casually, without much thought, but it means so much that it remains one of the only reasons I still have a Facebook. To check when other people's birthdays are, and for them to check for mine, of course. Why has this hackneyed saying retained such meaning? Is it really that we are just excited that someone else is happy we were born? Have these words come to mean something else? Whatever the reason, our hearts really do yearn for happy birthday, collecting those words the way elementary school children covet candy valentines and open their pillowcases, innocently, expectantly, for their trick-or-treats. As I said, I was a groggy, kind of nostalgic. I had a birthday morning with an alarm, for goodness sake, and none of my friends had planned any big birthday events for me. Not that I wanted to celebrate extravagantly with lots of not-so-close friends. My style was far from it. But the only party I was having that day was a pity party. I tried to rationalize with myself for a long time, to pray, to enjoy the sunshine, the birds, and the ocean, and to be grateful, for that to be enough. After a while, this gratitude actually started to take hold. Maybe it was more of exhaustion than anything. Self-pity will do that to you. And I was exhumed from my self-absorbed drama and the necessary lament of family distance. I remembered my mom. She told me that the principal faculty of family was to give us roots and wings. So maybe I couldn't find my roots that day because the wings were unfolding. Maybe while the nostalgia for my roots was bitter and irregular, my wings grew bigger. Maybe. I remembered the way my mom threw herself a Bob Goff Love Does style birthday party, organizing everything herself and planting several flower pots with her good friends to take to people in our church that they knew needed encouragement. I realized I was now an adult with incredible maternal roots, with the capacity to really make my birthday mean something, to celebrate in my own way. I did know that there was no way in hell I was gathering my friends to plant flower pots, but I did buy a cheesecake from the Montecito Vons and brought it downtown to share with a few of my friends living on the streets. I tearily recorded a video of myself before I left, talking about the way my birthday that year revealed my deep relational poverty. I talked about how many of my friends on the streets were physically poor, but had the relational capacity to love and be loved in much more powerful ways than I. I realized that we both needed each other, each bringing to the table a certain kind of lack and gift. The cheesecake cost something like $7, and it felt like a lot for a small cheesecake. But then I remembered that it was my birthday and that it is perfectly permissible to spend $7 on a cheesecake on your birthday. I descended the Montecito Hill and met one of my friends at the Starbucks on De La Guerra and State Street. I remember throwing open the door with renewed birthday purpose, presenting the $7 cheesecake to him like it was solid gold. He laughed and pulled out a bag of milk chocolate See's candies for us to share. My heart swelled. After talking for a while, I left to find someone to whom I could give the residual half of the cheesecake. I found a man in the De La Guerra Plaza that looked especially dejected, and I gave him my spiel, that it was my birthday that I bought the $7 cheesecake at Vons because I was pitying myself and how I shared it with my friend, but we couldn't eat it all, so I asked him if he wanted it. My speech was haphazard and overly excited at best, more confusing and intimidating to him at worst, but to his surprise and to my luck, he smiled and accepted the gift. We chatted for a few minutes before I decided to leave him and his cheesecake to their own. God knew I needed this. He knew that it was the deepest joy of my heart to buy a $7 cheesecake from the grocery store and share it with a few unconventional friends, both new and old. I drove away with exuberance emerging from my heart and the car speakers, so enthralled with the Jesus way of love, my family that is not indeed my family, the liberty and beauty of being set free by being led outside of myself. So April 22nd, 2017 wasn't breakfast in bed, or party hats, or really any kind of conventional birthday, but it was open and perceptive, connective and energizing. This was my celebration that day. This was the joy I chose, that each of us cheesecake eaters shared deeply, joyfully, gratefully in each other's neglect. I'm convinced that there is no greater thing than this. My family taught me the importance of celebration, of tradition and gathering and valuing each other, but my loneliness, my removal from family safeguards made my table a bit bigger. The exclusion inside of my own heart saluted the exclusion in others that day, and we celebrated. Birthdays are days with a certain kind of power, days that give us an excuse to extend love and compassion, to be confirmed and to confirm, to be loved and to love, the beautiful cycle, dichotomy of joy. Just to make sure my wings were functioning properly, my mom called in mom fashion to make sure that I was planning something fun for my birthday that year, that I did not resort to the same kind of dramatic antics last year, Brad. Maybe I will make my roommate toast me a Pop-Tart after all.
Hi, for the people joining us, there's some seats over here if you guys would like to make your way over, or find whatever's there. That works as well. Thank you, Gabe, for sharing. That was wonderful. Our next reader is Emily Mata. Emily is not a mountaineer, but she did grow up in Colorado, which is a pretty mountainous place. She writes poetry and essays and other thoughts, and also makes art because she is a 4 on the Enneagram and is therefore obsessed with any and all existing forms of self-expression. She is very thankful for Dr. Willis and the constant support and wisdom he's provided throughout her time at Westmont. This is Emily.
Hello. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Willis, for asking me to read. This is an essay that I wrote in the same class that Gabe wrote his essay in the creative nonfiction writing workshop with Dr. Willis last spring. The prompt for this assignment was super open-ended. It was just write a collection of prayers, or a prayer, whichever. And I ended up writing a prayer that structure is based on the Lord's Prayer. And yeah, it's a prayer that I have used to sort of create space for doubt and what I would consider my religious ambiguity, and trying to explore what it means to live in that wholly and presently. A collection of prayers to the God that might exist. Our Father who art in heaven, I come before you today with my eyes open and my hands closed. There is no we to partake in this worship, no pastors to break crackers, and no deacons to distribute grape juice redemption. My lips are pursed, my brows are knit together in thought, and loneliness is a vapor that takes the shape of its sanctuary. I sit in the third pew of its vast emptiness. Questions have outnumbered praises. I know not who you are. Hallowed be thy name. Each morning, I slip from a synaptic fantasy into a flesh and bone miracle. I slide out from under my warmed sheets and walk towards the mirror. Tired eyes meet tired eyes. I am that I am. Good morning, Godchild. I feel undivinely sleepy and consider crawling back to the comfort of my dreams, but there is water to be put on cloth and soap to be put on face. I touch the small, wet towel to my cheeks. The streaks of moisture steal heat from my skin in order to vaporize. I feel a tingle of cold, and I am part of the atmosphere. My fingertips dab foundation into my temples. As I rub circles towards my cheekbones, I notice a stretch of identity between my eyebrow arch and my lash line. I decide to illustrate it with stars and gold dust. There are words behind my lips, and today I paint them with rose petals. I shade the visions in my irises with long strokes of mascara, and I wonder how much wisdom is woven into each of my curls. Each morning is a new creation story, documenting a search for someone that I am when my sleeping mind is formless and empty. The bridge between darkness and day is the same field of energy that is created as the tip of my index finger traces my jawline. When one patch of my skin touches another, self blurs into self. There is no way of knowing which soft touches which, whether I am many discernible neurons or one single sensation. Multiple parts made one. How much can my human form tell me when I ask it what I should call you? Morning has rolled over, and I have been made in the image of. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. My father built me a palace when I was 8 years old. I'll never know how many days and hours and midnights he spent working on his drawings. He created it from the ground up. I remember when he walked from lot to lot and stood in different patches of sagebrush while my mom and I waited in the car. He breathed the air from different angles and imagined what could be. I walked through the house when it was still hollow. There were gaps in the ceiling and pieces of window on the floor. I kicked up a cloud of sawdust and bent over to touch the smooth tops of nails and the splinters of plywood. My father knew how each part fit together. He knew the names of the men who poured the concrete foundation and could tell you the size of each beam in the wooden frame. He gave his princesses separate bedrooms and closets with secret doorways that connected one to the other. He gave his queen a studio with windows and put her easel and paints in a place where she could see the sunset. He had seen and felt the stones that he used to build the walls before they were put in place. He had planned each doorway, each angle, each texture. His hands created excellence, and every moment he praised you for these gifts. Are you the one who provided the talents? Are you the one who orchestrated the years? His immigration, education, career, life, love story. Was it written by you who could see the way sadness overwhelmed his sunlight? Yes, my father would tell me. And this house was a hard-won covenant between him and the provider. You destroy the plots of men. Do you mean to destroy their hearts in the process? Is it you, celestial architect, who demolishes the fortress after you have built it? Everything rots with time, and 2008 was a year of catalyzed decay. People stopped buying. People did not build. The work which you had once said did not come. Your will be done. Each day of my father's life, he had already done more than he could. He carried on that way. He prayed. He worked. He trusted. The mortgage was not paid. Houses did not need to be designed. Job applications were denied, and the mortgage was not paid. The dream that had lasted longer than my lifetime was foreclosed, and my father lost his kingdom. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Cancer cells are selfish cells. They crave more of their own presence and bulge into spaces not meant for them. They divide into more of themselves and do not feel the cells around them that wonder where their breathing room has gone. Empathy and biological law are lost upon a tumor. You are the one who created us to be imperfect beings. When our fallen bodies malfunction, you bestow healers upon us. The day my mother is diagnosed with breast cancer, we do not blame you. We pray to you for guidance. The day they find a tumor in her brain, we do not blame you. We consider it another trespass of the body. When the surgeon tells her that he has lost the tumor sample extracted from her brain, we feel the reality of human error. She receives this news when her head is still dull and heavy, and her daughters have just told her that her eyes do not look like her eyes, even though they are her eyes, and they well up with tears of frustration. Still, she forgives and prays to you. When she is told by the next doctor that there was no tumor extracted, that to extract the tumor would cause fatal hemorrhaging, but that there is a piece of tissue missing from the adjacent gland, when she has to have a second surgery because going to medical school gives human beings the power to tell life-ruining lies, when she spends her late nights after work reading a how-to book about medical lawsuits, we feel the sting of human evil. I forget to forgive. But my mother, betrayed by her own body and by its guardians, continues to pray. Lead us not into temptation. This boy is beauty and joy, and his heart pours out of his smile. His arms are the safest I have felt, and his mind is a puzzle. He speaks to me in words that are soft and charming, words like te ves hermosa, and lo que amo más de ti es la forma en que piensas. He tells me that he believes that I can change the world and reminds me of it often. He tells me that he believes in a God. He believes that there's a being that has always existed and always will exist. But he's not religious. He laughs at his Catholic friends and their piety. We scoff together at the privatized, demoralized systems of control that others call church. I could tell him that this is where I draw the line, that my religious parents would not approve of me dating a non-Christian, and that I must sacrifice whatever strange, youthful, wonderful iteration of happiness this is, for the sake of familial unity, moral values. But I agree with him. If I were not raised in an evangelical family in the U.S., I would not believe the things I believe. If I were raised in Afghanistan, I would be a doubting Muslim. Perhaps in India, I would be a skeptical Hindu. If I were raised in any part of the world, I would fall in love with someone I am not supposed to. But deliver us from evil. Thank you for leading me to Westmont, the fully accredited path of the righteous. As I wind between As I whined between ocean views and an excellent student-to-faculty ratio, I remember why you wanted me to come to this school. You wanted me to pursue an education in a community of peers and professors who share the Christian faith. Suspecting that this is the reason that everyone else is here too, I began to laugh. A boy and two girls ascend the stairs, passing by me. I apologize to them silently for not sharing the faith, although I'm sure they do not care. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Morning glow is most beautiful when filtered through small, shaking leaves. Happy accidents of shaded paintbrush strokes create a white shimmer on concrete sidewalk. Shadows fall gleefully across a stranger's cheek. If you look farther down the street at the small patches of light that escape the shadow tops of buildings, you can see tide pools of purple and pale yellow at the base of each tree. In an aspen forest, this light becomes a dappled symphony of the sun and its children. The land dances around you, rustling and whistling as shade becomes bright and gold and it becomes blue, and all of the world sings in harmony. I see the bold, curved shadow of a trunk twisting into its foliage, and I'm impressed by his humility. No tree is more splendid than the next. They are old friends that have grown alongside each other's idiosyncrasies. They laugh at each other's jokes. They share illnesses. They have seen the same things and grown out of them in different ways. Their barks are gilded with mourning, and the only way I can respond is with a song of confession to you. Amen.
It is my experience that anyone you talk with will describe Dr. Willis as one of the most genuine and sensitive people they know. I had the pleasure of taking a course with Dr. Willis my first semester of college. It met on Monday nights from 6:30 to 9:45. Needless to say, I was less than thrilled to have a class that late. That is, until I actually went. During our first class period, Dr. Willis took us on a nighttime hike on the trail that he created, having us recite Shakespearean sonnets along the way. It was magical. The course quickly became my favorite because of his gentle guidance and passion for the literature we were reading. It is my honor to introduce him today. Current professor of English at Westmont College and a former poet laureate of Santa Barbara, Dr. Willis was born in Fullerton, California, and grew up in Corvallis, Oregon. Dr. Willis earned a BA in Biblical Studies from Wheaton College in Illinois and a PhD in English from Washington State University. His dissertation explored the topic of the forest in Shakespeare. His passions for teaching and the forest merged in his work as a mountain guide in the Cascades and Sierra Nevada. After teaching part-time at Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington, and full-time at Houghton College in Western New York, he arrived at Westmont in 1988. Dr. Willis lives in Santa Barbara with his wife, Sharon, a family nurse practitioner who also works at Westmont College. They met in Yosemite National Park and return when they can. Paul and Sharon have a grown son and daughter. Dr. Willis.
Thank you so much, Sam. I don't know if you really introduced yourself. This is Sam G. And Sam is the editor of our student literary magazine this year, The Phoenix. And she's going to do a wonderful job. And those of you who are students, this is a magazine you can feel free to contribute to. And I believe Sam will be hosting an open mic reading later in the semester. Is that correct?
September 20th. September 20th. It's soon.
Okay, great. And thank you, Gabe, for reading. Thank you for having a birthday. And thank you, Emily, for your prayer. Appreciate it. I remember not long after I came to Westmont, one of my colleagues at the time, Heather Spears, sat me down and she said, you know, you've written some fiction, you've written some poetry, but don't forget the essay. The essay is a wonderful literary form. And I'm glad she did that. The essay is easy to overlook. I mean, we assign them all the time as teachers, but why not make them fun? And I know some of you here are in writing classes and maybe writing personal essays. The full title, as Sam said, of this latest essay collection of mine is To Build a Trail, Essays on Curiosity, Love, and Wonder. And that subtitle comes from discussions we've had as faculty about how learning takes place and how learning might be measured. And I found myself saying in the middle of one discussion that curiosity, love, and wonder always take circuitous paths toward understanding. And that's a little bit of what I built this book around. These are essays about learning, really, and sometimes it takes a long time to learn. I think the gist of a personal essay is maybe narrating a personal experience and then reflecting on it. And that reflection grows over time. I'm going to read three short essays. Each one is about a teacher, really, from a different part of my life, grade school, college, and then very recently as an adult. This first essay is really kind of a revenge tragedy in some way. We've been talking about Titus Andronicus and about to get to Hamlet and the Shakespeare class, so I really think it is in that genre. And it is called Gumdrops. One day, in the winter of my 6th grade year, our old and discontented teacher, Miss Weir, informed us we would now take out our pencils and each write a story for the Corvallis Gazette-Times George Washington's Birthday Tall Tale Contest. Though the tales could not be all that tall, given the fact that they had to be 50 words or less. We all knew the one about the cherry tree, but that was true, wasn't it? So we scratched our heads and went to work, because according to Miss Weir, there was money to be had if we won. How much, she didn't say. This is what I wrote. One night, a Tory at Yorktown filled American guns with black gumdrops. In the morning, when Washington ordered his men to charge and fire, gumdrops emerged instead of bullets. Greedy British soldiers gobbled them up and fell to the ground with bellyaches. Cornwallis thought his men were dead and surrendered. It is not hard to guess where this story came from. In grade school, I liked to read about the Revolutionary War, and I also liked to eat gumdrops. And they must have given me stomach aches from time to time. So, with great imaginative flair, I connected these experiences, at the same time finding a way to make the father of our country an accidental pacifist. So we turned in our stories, and Miss Weir delivered them to the Gazette-Times, and we all promptly forgot about them until, just before Washington's birthday, Miss Weir announced to the class right after lunch that I had won the contest. I was filled with amazement and pride, and several days later, my prize-winning fiction was published in a newspaper under the title, A Sweet Way to Win a War. Then, the United Press International scooped it up and splashed it around the country as filler. And then, according to several neighbors, Paul Harvey himself ended his midday news broadcast with the tale, no doubt adding at the end, as he always did, and now you know the rest of the story. Anybody remember that? This was 1967. The war in Vietnam was, of course, well underway. I had only the vaguest ideas about this, or perhaps none at all, but our country needed every distraction it could lay its hands on, and I happened to be one of them. It wasn't the injustice of the Vietnam War that eventually got my attention, however. It was an injustice that emerged in our very classroom. A few days after my brush with literary fame, I put up my hand and asked Miss Weir, "Isn't there some sort of prize money I'm supposed to be getting?" Miss Weir pursed her gravely over-lipsticked lips and said, "The prize for the contest is $5, but since your story was part of a class project, I am keeping that money in my desk on behalf of the entire class." Then she opened her desk drawer, removed a $5 bill, and held it aloft for all to see. And then she put it back and gave me a glassy stare. The classroom got very quiet. But out on the playground, the verdict was given. Miss Weir is being Miss Weird. You got robbed, man. Which is how I felt myself. But out of some high-mindedness gained perhaps in Sunday school at the First Baptist Church, I decided not to complain. But that didn't make things any better. From that day on, for reasons I have never fathomed, Miss Weir declared war on me. And she wasn't using black gumdrops. No, she used big, fat, red F's on my assignments, whenever she could manage them. Outline for a report? F. Snowflake design? F. Notebook organization? F. She couldn't get away with it on spelling tests and math quizzes since I got a lot of the words and problems right and naturally could prove it. But give her a little wiggle room and she became wicked. I remember trying to tell my mother that Miss Weir did not like me. "Oh, it can't be that bad," she said. And then, one day, Miss Weir reported to the class after lunch that someone, and here she paused and looked at me, someone had stolen the $5 bill from her desk. "Now, who might that someone be?" she asked. Out on the playground, everyone said, "The $5 is yours to begin with. It wasn't really stealing." But I hadn't taken it and said so, face flaming. Hardly anyone believed me, least of all Miss Weir. How the spring played out, I can't recall. Miss Weir must have eventually stopped doling out those F's, perhaps because of a clandestine parent-teacher conference. Deep down, my mother may have believed me and done what she could to put a stop to bad behavior. But the more I thought about Miss Weir, the more I hated her in my heart. I nursed my grudge for a long time, and finally, vengeance was mine. My opportunity came almost a year later when I was in the 7th grade. I had come back to the elementary school on a Saturday morning to watch my younger brother play in a basketball game. The game, I suppose, was not all that interesting, or perhaps I was not all that interested. For halfway through, I slipped away from the shouts in the gym and tiptoed down a hallway to the classrooms of the upper grades. It was very quiet. I told myself I was just looking, just visiting old haunts. I was so much older now. How interesting to reflect back on former days. Then I came to the door of Miss Weir's 6th grade classroom. I turned the knob. It opened, and I went inside. And then I knew why I had come. Holding my breath, I walked to the main blackboard, lifted a piece of chalk from the tray, and proceeded to scrawl, in letters as large as I could manage, "We hate Miss Weir." Then, for a stereo effect, I did the same on a second blackboard on the other side of the room. And then, for the coup de grace, I opened the door to her private closet behind her desk and took out a soft pair of slippers, the ones she put on at the end of the day when she thought we were not looking, the ones to ease the aches and pains and corns and bunions on her elderly, swollen feet. Then I opened the top drawer of her desk, the drawer that had once held the contested $5 bill, and found a box of straight pins for posting bulletin board displays. I dumped half of the box into the toe of her right slipper and half of the box into the toe of her left, where they couldn't be seen, only felt. Then I put the slippers back into her closet and snuck back out of the room. I never heard how Miss Weir took it when she got to her classroom that Monday, so there wasn't much triumph to my private act of vandalism. I could imagine, of course, her astonishment and anger upon seeing those messages on the blackboards, and the sudden pain of merging her toes with all those straight pins later on in the afternoon. But for some reason, I didn't like thinking about it. My perfect hate crime gave me very little pleasure. I had told myself I was getting even, but all I got was ashamed. Now that I am as old as Miss Weir was when she was my teacher, and now that I am a teacher as well, I know how little it takes to become locked in conflict with a colleague or a student for reasons that deepen and multiply in the imagination. I know the twinge of envy that I sometimes feel when a younger friend or protege wins a prize or writes a poem that surpasses any I might win or write myself. And was that it? Was Miss Weir jealous? Had she entered the contest herself? Had she nurtured aspirations as a writer for many a year, aspirations that never met with recognition? I will never know, of course. But I do know, finally, like Flannery O'Connor's Misfit, that there is no real pleasure in meanness. At a school in which I used to teach, I once expressed myself in a way that so upset one of our administrators that she checked herself into the hospital for 2 days. Maybe she found Miss Weir there too. In my next life, my better life, I will go and visit them there and bring them flowers and gumdrops. Anybody have a teacher like that in grade school? Well, this next essay takes place in college, and I'd like to thank Jim Taylor for helping me with this essay. Once again, I found a way to be mean in my comments about someone, and Jim helped me be gentler. So thank you, Jim. So this is a second teacher, a more admirable one, I think. The title of this essay is Here, Mr. Hurt. In the fall of my freshman year at Wheaton College in Illinois, I took a required survey of the Old Testament. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I would have taken the class anyway because I hoped to major in biology and biblical studies en route to becoming a doctor on the mission field. In the meantime, however, since I seemed to be spending most of my weekends on rock climbing trips to Devil's Lake in Wisconsin, I was not passing my calculus class, which did not bode well for my plans to attend medical school. But I did like climbing and was sincere about biblical study, and I noticed that the Old Testament had a few mountains in it. The class was taught by a wry and patient man with a small, dark mustache. He told us to call him Mr. Hurt, not professor, not doctor, just Mr. I liked that about him. In response to our questions, he would say things like, I would tell you who it was that Cain married if I were able. He also told us that he was an archaeologist who spent his summers digging around in Israel and Palestine, that the clock tower of Edmund Chapel was in fact filled to the brim with pot shards from previous Wheaton expeditions, and if anyone wanted to help him catalog these precious items, we should let him know. To my knowledge, no one volunteered. That red brick clock tower was pretty massive, and I, for one, could think of better things to do in my spare time, like climb Red Quartzsite in Wisconsin. When Mr. Hurt would call the roll, I would sometimes cling to the facade of the building under the second-story window until he intoned my name. Then I would clamber over the window ledge and calmly say, "Here, Mr. Hurt." We would both keep a straight face. That was the cool thing about it. A few years later, as a senior, I asked my creative writing teacher to fill me in on graduate school. Like, how does that work? I asked. I've heard that in the summers you teach climbing in Yosemite, he primly said. That's right, I replied, pleased he would know this. That's probably a pretty good job for you, he said. And then he walked off. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As a freshman, trudging through autumn leaves on Wheaton sidewalks, miserably aware that the highest point in DuPage County was a landfill called Mount Trashmore, this future insult would have sounded like a blessing. And when we got to the story of Noah in Mr. Hurt's Old Testament survey, something clicked. Though Mr. Hurt allowed there might be something mythic, even folklorish about the flood, the ark, the 40 days, he also said that the mountains of Ararat, where the book of Genesis says the ark came to rest, have often been identified with an actual peak in Armenia and eastern Turkey, a very tall peak at 16,854 feet, its summit draped with glacial ice. Mr. Hurt added, with a slender smile, that several expeditions had been mounted to discover the remains of the ark high on the mountain. That sounded like a pretty good job for me. And I cooked on it for several weeks. Then, at the end of a Friday afternoon class session, I marched up to the lectern and reported for duty. Mr. Hurt, I said, I would like to go on an expedition to find the ark on Mount Ararat. I've done a good bit of climbing in the Cascades in Oregon, where I grew up, and I just spent my whole summer on the Juneau ice field in Alaska, so I know how to use an ice axe and crampons really well. I'm even trained in crevasse rescue, so I think they could use me for something like this. Do you know of an expedition that I could go on? It would be perfect. At Wheaton College, my professors always talked about the integration of faith and learning. Using my exceptional skills honed over the last 3 years in the mountains of Oregon and Alaska, I was bound to find the remains of the ark deep in the recesses of some glacier, somewhere right next to the summit, since I might as well get to the top while I was at it. The climb would be an apologetic triumph. The truth of the Bible proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, and all because of my steady determination and my handy ice axe twirling in my dapper grip. So I was confused when Mr. Hurt paused before answering me. Then he said, well, And then he shook his head slowly as if clearing it of a few stray pot shards. I'll tell you what I'll do, he said finally. I'll give you a book to read this weekend, and on Monday, if you still want to go find the ark, I'll connect you with the right people." "Deal," I said, and shook his hand, though I noticed his grip seemed surprisingly limp. I walked back with him to his office in Blanchard Hall, the iconic structure of the college, built of Kankakee dolomite, rough to the touch and apparently ideal for climbing, but not so when you actually ventured up the face. That dolomite was flaky as Hades. Mr. Hurt rummaged through his shelves until he found the book he was looking for, then handed it to me with an air of mild distaste. The book's title, in yellow psychedelic letters, was The Quest for Noah's Ark, and the book's author, in white print, appropriate for such a knight-errant, was John Warwick Montgomery. "See you Monday," he said. That weekend, I did not go climbing in Wisconsin. I sat high up on a fire escape in balmy weather and read all 335 pages of John Warwick Montgomery, for in my hands were the keys to the kingdom of my future. There were lots of pictures, and that made the reading go faster. Maps, of course, charts of previous expeditions, fuzzy photographs of arc-like shapes and ice, about as clear as images as I had seen of Bigfoot back in Oregon. But most of the images, curiously, were of the author himself, or of his son, who apparently had set an altitude record on the mountain for someone of his tender age. These photographs invariably displayed Dr. Montgomery all done up in his newly purchased alpine gear, posed on the side of the mountain, ice axe in hand. Most of the captions read something like this: "The author at 12,000 feet. The author at 13,000 feet. The author at 14,000 feet." The author may or may not have made it to the top of Mount Ararat, but that was beside the point. He had heroically made his presence known, and that was sufficiently impressed on his readers. But to my further surprise, I was not sufficiently impressed with his apologetics, because Jesus had once said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man." It was of paramount importance, said Dr. Montgomery, that the ark be found. And once the ark was found, he said, everyone on earth would be absolutely compelled to believe in Jesus. So by finding the ark, he would be bringing about the salvation of the entire world. Whoa, I thought, seriously? He could, of course, have argued something much more nuanced than this. Memory dims and simplifies. But this is what I remember, and this is what I remember turning away from. And those endless snapshots of the author striking a pose with his ice axe, which I may have multiplied in memory, they were, of course, pictures of me. Like the rich young ruler, I climbed down from that fire escape and went away sorrowfully. It is hard to abandon a cherished vision of your once and future self, even if that self has been reflected back in a funhouse mirror. On Monday afternoon, after class, I returned the book to Mr. Hurt. "Well," he said. I hesitated. "I don't think it's for me," I said, "this ark stuff. I think I'll be staying here, Mr. Hurt. Right here." Well, you've been great listeners. I know it's a little warm. My last essay is shorter than the first two, so you're almost out of here. This third teacher is a rather unconventional one. And as with Gabe in your essay, I met this teacher on the streets of Santa Barbara. So we're coming back in some ways to where we began this afternoon. This is probably the most recent essay in the book. It goes back to an experience of about 9 years ago, but I just wrote it year ago summer. It is called, "How Are You, My Friend?" For the year after our house burned down in a tea fire, my wife and I rented a condominium near downtown Santa Barbara. Our block was a mix of gentrified complexes and broken down old homes. The street was shaded, the sidewalk buckled, and parking difficult to find. The condo had a roomy, covered front porch from which we could watch motorcycles motor by, but I don't recall that we sat down on that front porch all that often. Something about the trauma of the fire kept us restlessly pacing. Our son was just a year out of college and back home from Los Angeles to work in a law office a few blocks away. A lover of cars, he had just bought a used Audi wagon to haul his drums from gig to gig. The perfect set of wheels for that purpose, he said. Our daughter lived a couple miles away with some friends, finishing up her own last year of college. This was our family, not counting the dog, which counted for a lot in those days. Years before, just after the 9/11 attacks, I took our dog to school for a week so the students could pet him during class. Similarly, in that year after the fire, our dog got a lot of attention, or we craved his. Right behind our condo was an old corner grocery store that had just been taken over by an immigrant family from Syria. It had become more of a liquor store, actually. The grocery part was fairly sad. The bananas were speckled, the ice cream was chalky, and the milk perpetually past date. It was the kind of grocery store we only went to when we needed something at the last minute. But in the evening, I would often walk the dog past the store and find the aging Syrian proprietor sitting calmly on the sidewalk, firing up a little stove to make some tea. Every time I walked by, he would call out, "How are you, my friend?" I would say that I was fine and continue on. The proprietor had 2 sons who worked in shifts. They were about the age of my own. Unlike their father, they were full of hurry and energy, as if through sheer force of personality, their shabby corner grocery store could become the next Walmart. I often thought of them growing old in the fierce white light of those bottles of vodka behind the counter, their nimble hands passing change for packs of gum and packs of condoms. I wished that my students had half their hurry and energy. I wished that these 2 Syrian boys could go to college. Late one spring evening, 5 months after the fire, our daughter woke us up with a call. Our son had been in an accident in his Audi wagon, a very bad accident. He was in the emergency room and we should get there right away. When we found him behind a flimsy curtain, propped up in a bed and no longer conscious, he was still bleeding badly from a depressed skull fracture. He would need immediate surgery. Friends gathered through the night as he lay on the operating table, and then in the morning came word of likely recovery. I do not remember everything of the weeks that followed, but here is something I do remember. My wife stayed at the hospital for several days and nights running, and I went home from time to time to walk the dog. One evening, the dog and I passed in front of the corner grocery, and there was the old proprietor sitting calmly on the sidewalk, firing up his stove for tea. "How are you, my friend?" he said. I stopped this time. I could not say I was fine, for I was not fine. Suddenly, this Syrian man seemed to me the friendliest presence on the planet. I approached, and he very graciously arose. I told the dog to sit, and then I told the man about my son and his accident, about his crushed skull and his operation, and how in the morning he had quietly opened his eyes and spoken to us, a miracle. But I told him how worried we were still, how the outcome was in no way sure, how my wife was still at the hospital, and here I was, walking the dog. The Syrian man stood very quietly and nodded. He listened to every word I said. "That is very hard, my friend," he said. And then he said, "Please, some tea, my friend." I'd like to think I accepted his offer, that he poured me some tea in a little cracked cup, that we sat quietly side by side and drank together in little sips. But I probably just thanked him and left. Night after night, however, I came back, walking the dog, and every time I passed by, if the Syrian father was sitting by the purr of his stove, he would call out, "How is your son, my friend?" And I would tell him, whatever the news might be, I would tell him, and my heart would well every time. My heart, that little cracked cup. Thanks very much. I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you again to Emily and Gabe. Sam had to slip out to a meeting. Leslie Smith will be selling books right outside the door. If you'd like one signed, I'll be right here. Thank you so much for coming.